Welcome everyone to our Erasmus Plus small scale partnership webinar. So today the agenda is going to look at we're going to have quite a lot to go through, but it's kind of going to be quite relevant to your application form as well. So we're going to look through the introduction to Erasmus Plus. We're going to have an overview of what small scale partnerships look like. We're going to have a project example from Liz is here from Early Childhood Education. We're going to go through the eligibility criteria, information criteria, so looking at like how your project is scored and how it should be designed. So this is in areas of relevance, project design and implementation, partnership and cooperation and impact. We'll also go through the application form and the technicalities that associated with your application form, and then tips and resources, and then final examples of project budgets. So it's a lot to go through, but hopefully that we will get it done by half hour, and then you'll be all confident to apply under the 4th of October deadline. Before we start with the presentation, we're just going to do Mentimeter. So what's a webinar without a Menti? So if people could go into www.menti.com, I will share my screen here. So if you see here, so it's going to be menti.com, and then the code is 6553-4524. So we just want to kind of get a sense of who's in the room today. So as people start looking, so we have Ireland, mostly Ireland. So we have Austria, we have some people from Greece, we have some Spain, from the UK. Perfect. Leave another few minutes for people to show where they're coming from. So for those people who are outside of Ireland, you're more than welcome to be here, but just to let you know, even though the information on Erasmus Plus small scale partnership is similar throughout, we are going to be kind of focusing on the Irish context as well. So if you have any questions about your application form, you need to go to your own national agency as well. So it's just important for you to know that your national context might be a little bit different. So if you have any questions about the application form, just still go to your local national agency and they'll support you as well. Okay, perfect. I might go to the next one then. So what field are you hoping to apply under this year? So obviously for the 4th of October deadline, you can apply under the fields of schools, youth, vet and adult education. Okay. So good few first, adult education, schools, youth. Hopefully get one for vet. It's on its lonesome. Oh, there we go. On its lonesome there. Okay. I'm conscious that there are a few more in the room, so I might give it another second. Perfect. Okay, so kind of good mix of people from all sectors, which is great. Of the information provided is relevant to all fields, so that's good as well. So you'll find out more now. And then the last question just for now is, how new are you to small scale partnerships? So are you a newcomer? Is this your first time applying, hoping to apply in October deadline? Have you experience in other projects in this field already, and then do you have experience in other actions before, but not this one? Okay, great. So there's a bit mixed bag here. So the small scale partnerships as well is focused on for newcomers as well, and it's looking at inclusion organizations. So if you're a newcomer, that's great. We'll embrace you with open arms. And for those who are moving from have experience, sometimes we find a small scale is a nice transition from maybe key action 1 to key action 2 as well. Okay, that's perfect. That's all we'll do for the Menti for the time being, but keep it open. We'll be using it throughout the webinar as well. Gemma, do you want me to share your screen, or do you want to?
Yeah, sure, you keep going there.
Yeah, no problem. Let's get it up here.
So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview about what is involved and what exactly is a small scale partnership, and we'll go into some of the facts and figures. So I suppose this is just interesting to know that there is a big budget for the Erasmus Plus program. So this 26.2 million goes right across 2021 to 2027 and across all the European countries. You'll see that there's kind of a bigger budget for some of the mobility projects we would call KA210 or KA1, whereas the partnerships, it is a smaller chunk of it, but it's still a significant chunk of it, that it's 30% of that fund. And I suppose it's also important to know that this is nearly double what we had in the previous program, previous to 2021. So there's a real kind of interest, I think, from the European Commission for this to happen and for these kind of projects to really go. And I think there's we can see the impact that they're having all across Europe, that these are important projects, and it's interesting that the Commission is really putting the funds into them. So if we go on, then we can see, what is it? What is a small scale partnership all about? So these partnerships, they're a minimum of 2 partners from 2 different countries. So that's yourselves and 1 other partner. So, you know, as we said, we call them small scale. They are small. They're kind of simple and straightforward to run. There is a list of countries there that you can choose from. So it's generally the 27 European EU countries, and then there's 6 other countries as well. We can send that list on to you. Now that is a minimum, so you can have more partners than that, and you can have, you know, a second Irish partner if you want, and then other European partners. You can have, I don't think there's a maximum on it at all, but generally it's a minimum of 2 partners from 2 different countries. The funding comes in a lump sum funding. So you can apply for either 30,000 or 60,000. You can't apply for anything in between. So if you start kind of figuring out your project budget, and we'll go into all the budgets later on, but if you kind of are landing somewhere in between that, then you need to either scale it up or scale it down a little bit to meet those lump sums, because that's what's on offer. So again, it's one of these things that it's, some people love it, some people hate it, having the lump sum. Some people love the flexibility it gives you. Other people would love it to be way more structured. But I think it's nice. I think it gives you a little bit of wiggle room to do what it is you want to do within that amount of budget. So small scale partnerships, you can do both national and transnational activities. So obviously you have your international partner and you are doing some work in partnership and internationally, but you can also run some national activities where that partner maybe comes to you and helps you to run an event or helps you to work on something, or vice versa. Or you can pilot something that you've worked on together in your national context. So you can have that mix. But really what it's all about is this flexibility. This lump sum funds give you the flexibility to work on whatever it is, whatever those ideas are that you have that you think would be useful. The duration of these projects, so they last between 6 and 24 months. So I know we had a brief chat there at the beginning, but not everyone had come in terms of when the projects would start. So your deadline is the October 4th. You'll find out towards the end of the year if you've been successful, and you'd be starting in the new year. So you wouldn't be starting until 2023. And again, that flexibility is up to you as to how much time you think you need to complete the project. And that includes any bit of kind of preparation time at the beginning and reporting time at the end. So don't leave yourself short. You have the full 24 months if that's what you think you need. I wanted just to mention a little bit about the 4 sectors that we're covering today, because sometimes people do get a bit puzzled as to which sector they're supposed to be sitting in. Don't worry, this is a conversation we're having all of the time internally in Leargus as well. It's not unusual. So I'm going to start with the school sector, because I think they're probably the most straightforward. So this is any kind of school education from preschool right up to upper secondary. So yeah, any type of formal education that you're working in. And actually we have a guest speaker today from that preschool age group, that before the primary school. So I think she'll give you some interesting insights into that. If we're looking at youth, we're generally looking at non-formal and informal learning for young people, and also for the youth workers themselves. So it doesn't have to be specifically targeted at the young people, it can be the people who are working with them. You look at things like skills development, working together, global interest projects, all of that kind of stuff that they're doing as young people in those kind of non-formal and informal groups outside of the formal education sector. Where we often get mixed up here in Ireland is the definition between the difference of VET and adult education, because here we tend to talk about FET, as in further education and training, which kind of crosses the two lines a little bit, just to make it a little bit more challenging. But in Brussels, these would be two very separate sectors for the at a European level. The easiest way to think about it is that the vocational education and training sector is vocational. So it's skills and knowledge for the world of work, something that people are learning that will help them either in their specific occupation or more broadly in the labour market and in that world of work. And it can be both initial VET and continuing VET. So it can be that kind of post-leaving cert education for young adults, but it can also be that continuing education for people in their professions. Adult education then fills up kind of everything else. So it's that non-vocational piece. So that could be anything from your kind of basic skills, such as numeracy and literacy, but it can also be the kind of wider life skills, personal development type work. So I hope that makes it a bit clear. I suppose what's also really useful to know across all of the sectors, in these Key Action 2 projects, these partnership projects, you don't have to specifically be the person who is delivering the different types of education or youth work. You can also be partnering with people who are in different types of organizations, maybe in research, in private business. So you're working with other organizations that it makes sense for you to work together, but it needs to have a link back to one of these sectors. You can also be working kind of cross-sectorally, but again, you need to sit yourself in one of the sectors most, you know, that is the most of a close fit for you. Because you have to, when you're doing your application, you have to pick the sector at the very beginning before you even start the application. So have a think about that. If you're not sure, come back to us. We can tease it out with you a little bit more. I think there's somebody here from at least 3 of the sectors today. So we have a whole presentation that we're going to deliver for you today, but we thought that the best way to start this off might be actually to hear from someone who is doing it already, because she knows what it's all about and she knows how it works. So we have Liz Kerins here from Early Childhood Ireland. Liz, I don't know if you want me to make you a co-host and you can do your own presentation, or do you want me to put it up and click through it for you, whatever is the easiest for you?
I can share, yeah, I'll share mine. That's great, because I added a couple of sentences as you do before you come on.
Perfect. I'm going to make you, you're a co-host there now, so you should be able to share.
I'll share screen. So, okie doke. And here we go. Sorry about that. Actually, that's not working out very well. Hold on one moment, please. Sorry.
Grand.
No, why is that doing that? Okay, I'll just move that over that way and that'll help us, won't it? Hopefully.
Yeah, we can see your screen. It's still in the kind of editing mode.
It is, yeah. I'm just going to put it into presenter mode. Hopefully, that's going to happen. How are we doing?
No, it's still in the kind of editing one.
Is it?
Yes.
Strange. Okay, I'll try this again. I'll get out and I will
I can put it up for you either, Liz, if that's easier.
Yeah, maybe it's going to be.
Good slideshow.
It's not working.
Into slideshow, Liz.
Yeah.
Up there. Over, yeah. Over another bit. Yeah, there you go. And then from beginning.
Yeah, I clicked it down below, but it didn't seem to work. It's coming up on my screen here. But,
all right.
Not on yours. Okay. Okay, I think you're going to have to share. Stop share. I'll just try once more and see how it goes.
Okay, I can stick it up here for you.
Yeah. I'll try again. Okay. So yeah,
Shout.
it's not going to work.
There you go. Shout when you want me to click on.
Yeah, please. That's great. Sorry about that. Now one of my screens has gone completely blank, so something weird has happened. That's okay. So thanks very much, and thanks very much to Largus for inviting me here today. My name is Liz Cairns. I'm the Director of Research with Early Childhood Ireland, and I'm going to talk today, or I've been asked to talk about our project, our Erasmus Plus project, which is called Enhancing Quality in Family Daycare. We received funding for that in the March 2022 application that Deirdre just mentioned earlier on there. It was under the small scale partnerships KA2 stream. Just for those of you who don't know, family daycare is basically what we would call childminding in Ireland. And childminding, in the same way as centre-based services, is considered part of the early childhood education and care system. And education and care is for children from birth until they go to primary school. Okay, so that's who childminders are providing services to. So it was a March 2022 application. We went for the 60,000. You'll remember that there's two sums available. We went for 60,000, and you will see why in a minute. And our project goes from the 1st of September, that should say 2022, that was one of the little changes I've made, to the 1st of March 2024. We're in the area of the schools programme that Gemma just mentioned earlier on there, which is where early childhood education and care sits. We have also done VET programmes, but this particular programme is under schools. We fit under the Erasmus Plus programme priorities, inclusion and diversity, which is a horizontal priority, and developing, and then two other priorities, developing high quality early childhood care and education, which, you know, as you can see from the name of our project, is very much what this is about, enhancing quality in family daycare, and also development of key competencies, so the development of the competencies of childminders or family day carers. And I have here in red, I suppose, you know, we're achieving, I suppose, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about our objectives and what we want our results to be from this project. But how we're going to achieve those is through a series of activities that are about peer learning, through mobility, through European mobility, using the Erasmus Plus programme, to learn from each other. And that's a really, really important part of this programme, something that really works for us. There are 4 partners in our project. As has already been said, you only really need 2, you know, to be ticking a criteria box or criterion box, but we have 4, and I'll talk about why that is in a minute. We have 2 from Flanders in Belgium, which is one of the 2 regions in Belgium. And one of them, Vlaams, and I'm really sorry if there's anybody here from Flanders on the line at the moment, Vlaams Velzinger Bond is a newcomer, and that's one of the criteria for consideration for this funding. They're a newcomer to, I think, to any, not just to Erasmus Plus, but to any European programs of this kind. And then we have Aarhus University in Denmark, and we have also an organization called VBJK. These are all new partners for us in the European Erasmus Plus program space. Next slide, please. And I have a lot of text here, not like the last speaker who had lots of lovely pictures, but I suppose this is available to you afterwards. You know, no problem if you want this. And I just found it very useful to use other people's from, you know, we're in the process now, I suppose, or we were in the stage last year where we'd never engaged in the small scale partnerships before, and we found other people's presentations very useful. So that's why I think, you know, there's kind of learning here. So why did we do this? Well, first of all, we're you can see there we're Ireland's leading advocacy and membership organisation. So our members are providers of early childhood education and care services. So they're a mixture of centre-based and childminders. So we work in partnership with them. We're all about the quality experiences for children. That's always where we want to be. We always want to be improving quality, just like the Erasmus Plus programme is a mechanism to do. And we advocate around the system. So we want the services to be really good quality, but we also want the system around them to be really good quality. So the system is things like, you know, funding and governance and all of those quality development agencies. And why I suppose there's a strong alignment between our results, I suppose, what we want to see from our organizational activities and Erasmus Plus. So Erasmus Plus is a key mechanism that the European Commission has for enabling the development of high quality ECEC in participant countries. And also our partners that I mentioned earlier on, the other 3 partners, all of our results are all of our goals really are all about quality for children in settings. Okay. So we already have, as I say, participated in KA1 and KA2 projects before. So I suppose in terms of why we did it, we're not jumping from either KA1 or the larger or another KA2 project. We've actually delivered and led on a KA2, the larger projects before. But this particular project, you know, was really useful to us and really helpful in terms of delivering quality across the 3 partner countries, or enabling quality across the 3 partner countries, because of the fact, I suppose, that it is, as was mentioned earlier on, it is a kind of a freer approach to the funding, and it allows us to dip our toe in the water, develop these new partnerships, learn from each other before maybe we start thinking going back into a KA1 project or a KA2, excuse me, project of a larger scale. And maybe the next slide, thank you. And again, lots of text here. I won't go through all of it, but what I put up in the next 2 slides is actually when you look at the application form. There is a piece in the application form that asks you really to describe. It's really your summary, your executive summary, and it asks you to describe your program. You know, what is it that you plan to do? What's the aim? What's the objectives? How are you going to achieve those objectives? What are the results? How do they all relate to each other? How do all of the results and the objectives? How is there a clear link between those and the activities? You know, you could be doing activities that lead you to a totally different result, and you don't want to put that on your application form. And that this part of the application form also asks you where is this need, and how does the need that you've identified, in our case, it was about improving the quality of childminding and family daycare. How does that relate to those priorities of the programme that we've already mentioned before around inclusion and quality improvement and the competencies? So, so our project is about exploring partners. So that's the 3 countries, Denmark, Flanders as a region of a country, and Ireland, examples of inspiring and effective policies and implementation. So this is a very much a policy focused application, looking at the systems for family daycare. So there's lots of kind of big words in there that are very policy words, but ultimately what we want to say is that we want the system around childminding services to be of high quality so that they can support high quality services. And we want to know how that's done in the 3 countries. And is there anything that we can learn from each other? Because it's really important that we're all learning from each other. So we thought that 3 learning, teaching and training activities in the 3 countries would be the best way to learn. The 3 countries, again, there's one, even though there's 2 partners in Flanders, there's obviously one LTTA. And then our objectives are obviously around exploring approaches in other countries, sharing the learning with target groups and stakeholders, and you'll be asked to do that in your application. Name your target groups. So some of ours are, you know, government agencies in these countries, in our countries, because we really want them to be at the best that they can be as well, so that people like childminders can be the best that they can be. So it's all about developing our capacity to be better advocates, and also about exploring further partnerships so that we can kind of think about how do we engage family daycarers more in improving the quality of their own services through developing their competencies. In the next slide, please. And again, the learning outcomes, I suppose these are the results that we want to see. And you really kind of, you know, I'll talk again in a minute about our learning, but these results you'll see in the learning are really important to be thinking about very, very early. You know, start at the end and work backwards from your results in developing the project. But I suppose we want all of our project partners and target groups, so that's the 4 organizations are the partners, and then the target groups like government agencies. We have a list, don't worry. They have to demonstrate improved knowledge, you know, from engaging with those in these LTTAs, of what are the best things to do in terms of developing a better system and developing better policies. So they have to at least know and understand something more than they did before they engaged with us in this Erasmus Plus project. And we also have a dissemination plan as part of that. So we have plans for, you know, kind of a wider group of people who may learn from our project. Our capacity should be increased at the end of this project, along with the 3 partners, so that we can articulate and advocate for better policy. And also, I think it's important that we're all more open at the end of it all, and bearing in mind that we're new partners working together, and that there's one organisation that has never been engaged in European projects, that we're all more open and more committed to cooperation and exchange through all the mechanisms of the EU. And then there's a last piece there, which is about linking with the priorities. And that's, you know, I suppose I'll come back to that in the end in terms of the learning, but this is a really, really important part as well of the application. So I suppose our learning is, and this is my own piece of learning, the big bits in red. I suppose I'm thinking about the next, I have 2 slides here, and the next slide is about the application piece, which I know we're going to go into later on, but there's something as well about being prepared before you get into your application. So it's about developing your partnerships and your project well in advance. We have 4 partners. You could just have 2, which is simpler, and there's a lot to be said for being simpler. For us, the reason we have 4 is that 1 is new, a brand new organization. It's a very kind of grassroots organization, and it needs support from this more experienced at European level organization. So we're internally developing each other's capacity, but also because there are things to learn from, we each have something to learn from each other, and the 3 countries have very similar issues. So there's a logic behind those 3 countries coming together, the 4 organizations, but it could be 2. 4 isn't better than 2 is what I'm trying to say, I think. But developing your partnership, understanding get a common understanding of the issues in each other's countries. So we met quite a bit, just to talk, just to write, just to kind of develop, well, you know, what's the problem? Like, what is it that we're all trying to understand better? How do we think that the Erasmus Plus program is the right way, is the right mechanism for us to help us understand what's going on in our countries, and to be able to advocate for something better. And then all partners must equally learn through engagement and must articulate their particular. So this is, I suppose, to be thinking when you're in the prep before you start getting into the application form, we learned, is to think about what is it that we're all going to learn through this engagement. So it can't be that only Ireland is learning from Denmark and Flanders, you know, and actually you might think, you know, gosh, other countries have great things in their countries, you know, in terms of early education or childcare, as it's often called. But actually, when you get into those deeper conversations, you realise that there's much more of there's a stronger role for Erasmus Plus than you might actually initially think in terms of that learning through mobility. So really, really important. And also to think about what the particular roles and strengths are, you know, so we have to kind of think about the diversity of the organizations and think about what is it that we're all bringing, as well as what do we all want to know, you know, what's missing for us, what are the strengths that we're all bringing, and some of us are better at some things than at others. So that's really, really important. And that takes time, not easy to do 3 or 4 weeks before an application process. So I suppose I'd say that. Obviously, spend time familiarizing yourself with the application form, refer to the program guide, and I'm sure this will all be in the presentation later on, and any other supporting documents. Make sure you relate whatever you're developing to the Erasmus Plus program priorities. As I say, for us, the horizontal priority was around diversity and inclusion, and then the other 2 priorities were around quality and early education and developing the competencies of part of the workforce there, childminders. So just be really clear on that. Keep the application simple, not too many partners, but for us, you know, as I say, it made sense. Learn from the examples of other successful small-scale partnership applications, like yourselves here, if you haven't already engaged in the small-scale partnership or in any other Erasmus Plus programs. We just found these kind of labs and events that Lurgus put on to be absolutely invaluable, totally invaluable. And we took away every presentation that was given to us, and we learned from them, and we analysed them and tried to figure out what was successful in them. And simplicity was often the key, and being very clear on how the results, the objectives, the activities all kind of relate to each other, and the horizontal priorities. So it's worthwhile putting in the prep. And this is kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the things, I suppose, that tripped us up a little bit, to be honest with you. you think you have it, you think you have it sussed, but sometimes it's good to be aware and good to be as prepared as early as possible before the application date. So one of the things is ensuring that you and your partners all have your organizational ID. So that's the OID that you have through Lergus, but we have it through Lergus, our national agency, that allows us to apply for this funding, and make sure that they've your partners have all of their forms with their national agency. All the correct forms are there and have been approved by their national agency. And try to start your application form. Like, I wouldn't start it a couple of days before you're thinking about sending it in. Start on that application form straight away. We did sections of the application form in Word and then transferred it into the application form, just in case. Always good to have it in a few places, and check that all your information is correct, because we did have some issues there. Be clear on each partner's legal representative and primary contact person, and that's again about the paperwork that is in the online portal that you'll be applying through, is to make sure that each partner's information is correct, and that it's correct, that it tallies with what's on the portal, tallies with the paperwork that you're putting in, because we have had that issue. And checking to see what requires wet signatures, which is when you get your pen out and you sign something, and when an electronic signature is okay on forms, because it might take you a while to get a wet signature, particularly if you're working from home. Very small thing, but it could take days. Put days on your application. Take note of the character count. You're required to be fairly pithy, so every word counts. And again, we did it in Word first, and got it that way, and then transferred it to the application form. Have a clear and detailed plan when you're setting out to develop the application form, as far in advance as you can, which partner is completing which specific section, who's reviewing it, and get as many people reviewing it and looking at it as possible, and setting dates and trying to stick with them for completion and review of all of that plan, and of every kind of piece of input into the application form that's required from all the partners. So yeah, engage with Lergus. I have this in red because, not just because they're here, but you will actually be clearer and save time in the long run. And even if you ask them the same question 3 times in a row, in different calls, they won't look at you strangely. So really checking with Lergus all the time. We're a national agency for other national agency for other people on the call is really, really important, and they're very much here to help and support. And we've never had any other kind of experience with our national agency except supportive. So that's really, really important. Our next steps, this is my last slide. The project has really only started. We're in the baby stages at the moment. We're just learning to walk. So again, we're continuing to engage with and be supported by Lergus. So that continues. We have events coming up on the 22nd and 27th of September to support us in project planning and to support us in I suppose in financial, I can't think what the word is now, kind of financial oversight of the project. We're also developing a more detailed project plan. We have a project plan in the application form, and we have some other little project plans that we developed ourselves to, more detailed ones, but really we're going to have to go much larger now with a project plan. And that's what we're looking at the moment, a much more detailed project plan, which is absolutely vital, and setting up our online shared platforms for sharing our documents and when we can all work together, and setting up our project management system and all of that kind of stuff, which really does take time. And then we have a project kickoff meeting on the 3rd of October, but we'll be coming to that with plenty done, with the project plan already being tic-tacked between the whole lot of us. And we'll also be coming with draft first outputs, which is about, again, helping us all to understand each other's countries. So we'll be coming with pieces already worked on. So there'll be plenty to do. And then our first learning activity is in January 2023. So that's not far away. So there's a lot of prep to do before that, including bringing on board all of those stakeholders that we're talking about earlier, on top of the partners, to try to get them on board to come along with us and engage with us. That's it. Thanks very much.
That was absolutely amazing, Liz. Thank you so much. I feel like the rest of us can just go home now. You have, without any chat between the two of us, you've covered my whole slide that I had about pitfalls later on, and all the little mistakes that people make and all of that. So
it just goes to show you still make them.
yeah. Well, listen, I hope that for anyone that's here that's listening, that was really useful. Certainly, even just for me, just to think of sort of the different things and the different, you know, we're very caught up in it here in the office in Lerga, so it's great to hear other people's perspectives and other people's language on it. Now, I am aware that Liz used a few kind of terms and phrases that are very Erasmus plus, and I'm probably guilty of it as well. So please, people, do use the chat. If there's anything that you don't understand that we've talked about that you need some explanation of, please feel free to jump in with the chat messages here. There's a few of us here that can answer your questions. So I know Liz talked about the program guide. That is the main book that kind of summarizes all the rules and regulations about your application. We will be sending you on the link that you can download that. We also, whenever we talk about KA1 or KA2, that's Key Action 1 and Key Action 2, and they're two different types of projects that we run. So these small scale partnerships that we're talking about today, they come under the Key Action 2. They were the two that caught my eye. But is there any other kind of language like that that we're using that people are not sure about? Please just throw a message in the chat, because I think when we're working with this language all day long, we can sometimes forget that people don't know it. So Carmel, are you doing the? Yes, you are. Excellent. So let's just have a look at a few more bits and pieces. I don't see any questions coming in the chat, so I'm going to keep moving. But as I said, do interrupt me here if you need to. So this is the eligibility criteria, just to let you know, are you the right person here that can apply? And most likely, yes, because for the Key Action 2 projects, it's very broad. It's any public or private organization. The main thing here that can catch people the odd time is we can't take sole traders. So you must have a legal entity of some sort or another. As I said, it has to be 2 organizations from 2 different countries, and those countries have to be on the list. And your project itself must be addressing one of the priorities. Now, we're not going to go through all of those today. I think we had sent you a video in advance, and hopefully most of you got a chance to watch about the priorities. So do have a look at that again. There's horizontal ones that go across all the sectors, and then there's these field specific ones. So have a look at those and see where does your project fit. And if it doesn't fit any of those, then come back to us and have a chat, because it does need to fit into some of the priorities in order to, make sense as a European project. Another one to just be aware of is the venue. So your activities must take place in the countries of you or your partners. So, if you're partnering with a French and a Spanish organization, well, then your activities must generally take place in Ireland, France, or Spain. The exception there is it can also be the seat of an institution of the EU. So if you wanted to do something in Brussels or The Hague, you can also go to those places as part of your project. I'm sure there's a few other seats of the EU, but yeah, so they're all listed in this big book that we talk about, the program guide as well. And then we will tell you this a few more times before the end of today. The deadline is the 4th of October. Get that in your diary. Mentally put it in your diary for the 2nd of October at least, so that you're not trying to run into it at the last minute. And I was glad that Liz said that, because we always say that as well. We had another application clinic this morning where we were trying to demonstrate one of the application forms live during the video, and it didn't work. And sometimes this does happen, and sometimes the application forms do glitch a little bit, so always give yourself some wiggle room. But the absolute deadline is 11 a.m, which is 12 a.m. in 12 noon in Brussels. So it's 11 a.m. here on the 4th of October. Oh, I actually did have all the countries up. Okay, excellent. I'd forgotten I had this slide coming up. So there we go. So it's the 27 member states of the EU. And along with that, you have North Macedonia, Serbia, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Turkey. And I did make a note there to say that the UK is unfortunately not eligible to participate. I know a lot of people prior to Brexit would have had very good partnerships with organisations in the UK, but unfortunately we can't work with them anymore for the small scale projects. But you still have 33 countries there to choose from. So I think there's plenty of options, and there's plenty of amazing work happening around Europe that you could work with. So I think, am I going back to you, Carmel, for this bit?
I did multitasking here. Yeah. So we're going to go into kind of the work criteria. So basically the work criteria is the scoring you'll get for your application form once it's been assessed by a member of Lurgus or an external evaluator. So the work criteria is kind of based into 4 key areas. These are relevancy, project design and implementation, partnership and cooperation, and impact. So when we talk about relevancy, what we're looking at is like considering how the project is relevant to the program and action in the chosen field and the priority. So like the key priority or the horizontal priority, how is it connected to that? The profile, the expertise and relevance of partners and European added value. So we'll go into these in much more detail in the next few slides. The second one then is project design and implementation. So we're looking at considering the project objectives, methodologies, work plans and activities, and how is it value for money. And then these are all going to consider in your project design. Then partnership cooperation. So this is looking at how your partnership is going to work together. Like, so you're considering the roles and responsibilities, the experience of different partners, the tasks and coordination and how that looks like. And then the final thing is then it's in the area of impact. So what's the impact of your project going to be on your stakeholders, your organization at a national or European context, and how are you going to showcase this impact, or how are you going to disseminate what you've learned? Within these criteria, you must get at least 60 out of 100 to be awarded funding. So 60% is required to get passed for funding. You also need to ensure that you get a minimum of half these points for each of these as well. So you need to get 15 points for relevancy, score that in your assessment, 15 points for project design and implementation, 10 for partnership and cooperation, and 10 points for impact to be awarded funding as well. So I think this is so that sometimes we find that some organizations might go really strong in terms of like the project design implementation or their partnership cooperation, but they might not have so much information on relevancies or impact, and or sometimes you can see an application that people are so motivated at the start of it, but they kind of burn out by the end of it and provide a little less impact or information on impact. So all of these are the same weight in terms of like importance, and it's really important that you and your partners consider all of these areas in your work criteria when designing your project as well. So let me go to the next slide. So going into relevancy a little bit better. So relevancies, these are so the key areas or objectives of small scale partnerships is, so specific objectives are to widen access for newcomers, support inclusion, support European citizenship and the European dimension. And then in terms of the general objectives is increasing quality in work practices and participation in organizations, building capacity of participating organizations and addressing common needs of participating organizations, and then in enabling change. So for your project to be relevant, you should be considering these objectives and how your project will connect to these. It's also really important that your project is relevant to the field as well. I know Gemma was talking about this a little bit earlier, but you don't necessarily have to be working directly with target group. So for example, if you want to apply under the youth field, but you're not directly working with youth, that's okay. But you need to be able to showcase the impact it's going to have on that youth field as well. So you really need to bring the relevancies to the objectives with this. Also, wherever your project you're with the small scale partnership, there are such a flexibility in terms of you designing your project, and you have the kind of remit to do what you want to do with it, but it does have to be relevant to the objectives in the field and the program. So you need to consider, how does this fit into the Erasmus Plus program? Sometimes we do see that people might be putting like a square peg into a round box. So you really need to consider, okay, how do these complement the work we're currently doing, and that it'll enhance the project as well. It's not a case that you want to design a project like you want to do. It's like that cart before the horse thing as well. It's like, it's important that you have your project can complement the work you're already doing, rather than creating a project to do the work, if that makes sense. So you really need to show kind of the relevance of the project and the needs of the project as well in your application form. So we had sent this out to you earlier. So we have a small video made by Siobhan on kind of the Erasmus Plus priorities, and these are looking at the horizontal ones and also on the kind of the national or the field specific priorities as well. So please have a look at that. It's actually a really good presentation, and it will provide you with a little more insight in terms of what you should be considering as well. So project design is the next part. I'm not sure if there are any questions about relevancy before we go into the next section. No.
No, we're
Okay.
keeping an eye on the chat here, Carmel, but
Great.
they're kind of more general eligibility type ones at the moment.
Brilliant. Okay. So project design. So with this area, so we're looking at now at the project design area. So this is kind of looking at the planning phase of the project stage of the life cycle of your project. At this stage right now, you should all be at the planning stage. So you should be considering, okay, what we're looking at in terms of defining objectives, the needs, the target group, learning outcomes, partners, and time frame, the budget. So this is where you should be at right now in terms of planning your project. With this, then once you have I think from our experience, once you have a detailed plan put in place before the project starts, it makes it for a much more smoother process in terms of implementing your project. This stage is so important to be having those conversations with your partners and discussing kind of the structure, the preparation, implementation, and follow-up as well. So you should really be doing this at this stage and really identifying the kind of expectations from the partners, the kind of roles and responsibilities, and what all partners want to get out of this. Once your project is awarded funding, then your kind of project stage starts. So you'll be looking at the preparation, implementation, and follow-up. So the preparation is really kind of looking at the project management and communication, setting up the activities, the practical arrangements, administration ranges. So you can see that Liz was talking there about how she's already having meetings with her partners to kind of start with their kind of agenda ready to go for when they meet up for their first kind of prep meeting. So this is really important that the preparation phase is considered at the beginning of your projects, but throughout as well. You might have, for example, 3 or 4 different work packages, which will all need a preparation phase as well. So you need to kind of think of these stages all kind of a little bit multifaceted. You need to see it as the overall project, but then whatever work package, what is the stages needed there as well. In terms of implementation, that is what your activities are taking place. So that you might decide to be doing a study visit. This might be a phase of your implementation. You might be deciding to do a piece of research. Like these are your kind of implementation stages of your activities or your work packages. So these need to be considered and mapped out in a realistic way in your timeline as well. We have kind of seen in past as well that in terms of follow-up, this is where people kind of sometimes fall down in terms of scoring or in terms of what they consider as well. I think we're all kind of very busy and our organizations are very busy. I think since COVID, everyone's kind of on a much more of a fast forward pace at the moment. And then what happens with that is we move on to the next thing. But what you need to really consider is to follow up with your projects as well. So looking at how do you evaluate your activities, what's the impact, how are you going to measure the impact, or what indicators are going to show you the impact of your project? How are we going to share these results with your stakeholders as well? And to see like, okay, how is it going to be integrated into our organization as well? It's going to be really important. There's no point doing a Erasmus Plus project if it's going to be like, oh, that was a nice experience at the end of it. You really want to see kind of the long-term or sustainable impact of your project throughout the life cycle as well and going forward with your organization. So it's really important that you consider this when you're looking at your small scale application form as well. Then in terms of target groups, it's really kind of looking at, okay, who are we targeting or working with? Like who will benefit from your project and how will they be involved? So remember to give approximate numbers of people who will be involved in the project from each partner country. Example, piloting and surveys. So tell us who they are, like who are you working with? Who is this project going to impact? Is it going to impact young people? Is it going to impact like adult learners? Who is the impact of this project primarily focused at? Then is keep the same target group throughout. We sometimes find that some applications forms might say start off saying they're working with young people, and then they move into students, or they might move into like adult learners. So it's really important that you maintain the consistency in your application on who the target group of your project is, who's at the heart of your project. Like for under the youth field, I would say like it's important to have a youth-centered approach when working with looking at your application form or you're developing a project. And the same goes with adult education, schools, or vet. Who's the heart of your project and how is it going to impact them in the long term? Make sure that they belong to the field you're applying under. So like we've said, you might not necessarily work in a specific field, but it's important that you're connecting with that field. So you could look at, just for example, you're working in you want to do a piece of research looking at young people, but you're not working with young people directly. It's like, okay, what partners or associated partners are you going to connect with then to make sure that it's linking back to the core target group? So you really should consider that when you're applying for a field, and where do you more appropriately lie. Like Gemma said, there's always sometimes like confusion in terms of, are you vet, adult education, and that sometimes can link in with schools and youth sometimes when you're like, we're working with young people, but is it a school setting or is it a youth setting? And it is to consider kind of those kind of the key criteria that which was set out in an earlier presentation as well. So make sure you and your partners have links to the target groups, and don't forget to provide specifics. So that's exactly it. So if you don't have direct links to the target group, make sure that you have associate partner and identifying them in the project that you're going to link in with to make sure that your project is going to connect with them as well. So remember then to give, yes, like we said before, the approximate number of people you'll work with the small scale partnerships as well. You have the joy of like doing the transnational element of your project, but also national activities as well. So your target group, you might not necessarily be engaging them at a transnational level, but you might say, okay, we're going to have a training event for our target group, or we're going to have a national activity where these people are going to meet as well. So consider how you're going to structure your target group into your project as well. Okay, explaining the needs. So show how the needs you have outlined is also relevant for your partners and the target group they work with. I think with this as well, it's showing your needs analysis for your project or having a really strong relevance of your project is going to be so beneficial for your whole life cycle of your project. Because if you have clear evidence of the needs of the project, then you're going to have a clear evidence of impact it's going to have on the organization or the field as well. So by really considering the need of your project and doing the work on it, it will show kind of that impact will then go throughout the project as well in terms of design, the impact and follow-up as well. So available examples are data. So looking at specific examples of data already available from you and your partners at a regional, national or European level, example findings from previous observations or work reports and policy papers. Then you can look at consultations with stakeholders. So consider consulting with stakeholders before you submit to confirm and show your need, support and idea. You can also reflect and explain. So reflect on what you know and explain this in your application. And then don't forget to have a transnational focus on this as well. Sometimes we find that if you're applying under, say, for example, Lurgus, you might have a very Irish-centric approach to your project where you're talking about the needs of Irish target groups or the needs of your organization, but not really taking that into account of the partners as well, or the impact of the project on partner countries as well. So you really need to think, okay, even though we're taking the lead, this impact is going to be on all partners, and we need to show evidence of this as well. For us as well, I think you should be looking at incorporating all these kind of examples of needs analysis into your application form. I don't think from just having showcasing saying this evidence of research done is evidence enough in terms of the needs. You really need to bring the needs back then to your organization to your kind of local and national level as well. So if you had a European report that states that there is, I don't know, 80% youth in employment, and we're going to do a project on this, you need to really show the evidence actually at a national context as well, and then how it connects to your organization as well. So sometimes we find having that kind of more of a triangulation approach to identifying your needs would strengthen your project as well. Okay, so in terms of your objectives and needs, it's really important that these are you consider this them being smart, so specific, measurable, accurate, attainable, relevant, and time-based, but also that the objectives can link into the next side of it as well. So if you're looking at your objectives, you can connect them to kind of your KPIs or activities or deliverables, and then you can showcase what the expected results are out of this as well. You don't have to write reams and reams of information on this. You can have clear, concise information. So saying the overall aim of this project is X, and then these are the objectives of this aim. And that's clearly showcasing that in your application is really good. It's also important to remember, and I know we mentioned this earlier, that when we have external assessors, they might not be necessarily from Ireland, or they might be from the European context. So you need to really consider, okay, how do I make sure that the person reading this can really have a clear insight on how this is going to impact the national context or the European context as well, and providing clear evidence of that. Okay, next one. So remember, always keep the need of the project to the forefront of your project implementation and design. So always bring back to the objectives of the project. So in the work criteria, you saw the 4 different sections. So it's really important that the objectives are reflected through all of these as well. So examples of project activities, these are training activities, piloting, site visits, project results, partnership meetings, online face-to-face meetings, and national seminars. We'll give some examples as well. I know Liz did a great example earlier, but we'll have a few more examples to showcase to you as well and what we meant. Some organizations also like to use a Gantt chart, so where they can break down the kind of timelines of their projects. You might break this down into work packages where you're going to have an overview of, okay, this is how we were going to work on next few months, but then you might also have a Gantt chart per work package as well. So it's really best about how you as a coordinator organization are going to make sure that the project management of your project is going right, and that it's not, that everything's going to be kind of condensed in a few months as well, that you're really considering the timelines as well for this. Gemma, am I jumping into your part? I'm not sure.
I was wondering that, but I can jump in for a while if you want.
Thanks.
Give you a break.
Perfect.
Yeah. We hadn't, I'm not sure. So the chat has been fairly quiet. I'm encouraging people again, please do jump in if you have questions or comments. We're here for you. We want everyone to leave knowing what they need to know and feeling confident about their application. So please do feel free to jump in the chat here if there's anything that you're not clear on. So to have a look at the cost effectiveness. Previously, the funding for these kind of projects would have been quite spelled out and would have been very specific for this many activities in this many countries with so many people. It changed in 2021 to this concept of the lump sums. So it is a bit different in that it gives you an awful lot of flexibility, but at the same time, it does need to be value for money. So what we've seen in the last few times with the applications coming in is that sometimes people just don't spell things out enough for us to know if it's value for money. So if you tell me you're having an event and it costs €10,000, that's great. But if you give me a gist of how many people are going to be there and is it going to be for 1 day or for 3 days, like all of that kind of information helps us to have a sense of, okay, yeah, that's why they're budgeting that much for it, and that makes sense. So I would say just give us enough information that we're clear on it. And that it's appropriate. Of course, you also don't need to do the opposite extreme. You don't need to be cutting corners. We do want these projects to be good quality and all your activities to be good quality. We don't have a specific limit for how much you can put in for project management costs under the small scale partnerships. For the larger projects, there is a limit on it. We would say approximately 20%. So that approximately 20% of your budget would go to just general project management, and then the other 80% would go to specific activities and outputs and different things that you're doing. But that will make sense to you depending on your own project. The Commission brought out this fantastic handbook. It's a handbook on lump sum funding, and the link for it is there. So all of these links, when you get the slides in the email later on, will have the hyperlinks that you can click through. So if you're having any challenges with the budget part of it, I would say have a look at that lump sum funding handbook, and that might be able to give you a hand as well. Another question we get sometimes is about subcontracting. So the main thing to remember here is it is allowed, but it cannot take over any of your core activities. So ultimately, you should always be managing the project. You should be keeping an eye on the objectives and the outcomes and making sure that the project is running to plan. But equally, sometimes we see people maybe need to subcontract out publishing of a publication or setting up a website or something like that, where they just don't have the specific skills for it. So that is fine, but it's just that you need to be clear that they're not taking over the full running of your project. You need to be quite clear about what it is that you're subcontracting, and there has to be a limit there as well, that it has to be a 20% maximum that can be subcontracted out. So just keep that in mind. If there are things in your project, if you're feeling very ambitious and you want to do lots of exciting things, but maybe don't have those specific skill sets, just to have a think about how are you going to do that and how are you going to make sure that it's under the limit. Yeah, so I think that's it for the kind of finance piece. Again, Dee is on the ball here with the questions in the chat, so I will keep moving. So this is the piece then about partnerships and cooperation. So when Carmel showed you the criteria earlier on, one of those criteria that we score on is the actual partnership and how that partnership is set up and how well it's working together. So I would, and I think Liz also talked about this in terms of how to, make sure that you've had those conversations with your partners at the beginning of the project when you're writing your application, that you're all on the same page. So we do look at that as well. So when you're planning your partnership, make sure that you've got a range of skills and expertise. If you're looking at something that you might need to bring in different types of organizations, you don't necessarily all want to be the exact same organization. Maybe you want to bring others that do what you're saying, similar work or work in the same field, but in a different way that you can learn from each other. We would also say that it's good to have the newcomers involved. So this small scale partnership activity in particular is kind of targeted at the newcomers. There's a plan there that we're trying to, it's smaller funding than some of the other big projects that we run. So we're trying to bring new people on board. So consider having a newcomer in your partnership, unless you're a newcomer yourself. It's equally okay to have, one very experienced person and a few newcomers. So those kind of balances, but just feel free to try and use this project to bring some new people on board as well. And again, and I think Carmel talked to this a lot in terms of that relevance piece, it needs to make sense to us as to why those partners are working on that project, that there is some link back to the target group at a national or even a local level, that you are actually directly working with the target group that you're hoping to impact. If you're planning on piloting with a particular group, do you have a group in mind? Do you work with a group? Do you have contacts that will give you access to that group? So that all needs to be thought about within the partnership. The next piece of that then is actually the practical stuff. So how are you going to work together? What are going to be the roles and responsibilities of all the different partners? So you need to share out the tasks, and you will be asked about that in the application in terms of how are you going to work with this. You'll always have one person as the lead partner and they're kind of coordinating everything, but it's absolutely fine. And in fact, it's quite good to delegate particular tasks down. You might have one part of the project that somebody is completely looking after and different bits. You also need to maximize the kind of skills and experience of your team there. So if there's one organization that has lots of experience in a particular area, they might take the lead on that, but they'll make sure that everyone else is brought along with them so that they're all learning from each other as well. And I suppose just that there's a bit of a balance so that it's not looking like the coordinator is doing every single thing and everyone else is just turning up. So it's that there's kind of a shared out across all the different tasks and all the different roles and responsibilities throughout the team. One really important part of working in partnership is that communication piece. So it's, you know, how are you going to communicate about the project and during the project, and how are you going to work together? I think a little small benefit of the pandemic has been that we've all learned how to work together online. We've done an awful lot more of that than we might have ever done before. So I think those digital tools are now something that's kind of easier for people. We've come up with a lot of different ways of virtual and online collaboration. But really, it's just thinking that through, and how are you planning to work together? I think this diagram is quite useful in that it kind of gives you, so who's the specific project team? So that might be the one coordinator in each of your partner organizations that's really doing the bulk of the work, and you might be chatting more often. Whereas your overall organizations might only be linking in every few months just to see how the project is going and to get updates and things like that. Your target groups, then you may not be directly contacting at the very beginning, but then when you go to pilot something or deliver something, then you're working with them. But then there's also that piece about the other stakeholders. So how are you telling the wider world about what you're doing? How are you keeping us in Lergus informed? How are you making sure that the impact of this project is as big as it can be by spreading the word through your networks? We've given some examples there of the things that you might be communicating about. So whether it's sharing ideas, whether it's talking about the risk management and how are you going to deal with conflict, I would say talk about that from the very, very beginning. Let's just name it. It does happen. Partners will disagree on something, or they will have maybe understood something in two different ways, and you have to have those conversations. So talk about that from the outset as to what are we going to do if we do have a conflict, what are the risks we might come across, and how are we going to avoid those from the very beginning. There's an example there as well about the stakeholder input. So how are you going to make sure that the project that you're running is actually relevant to the people you're hoping to reach? So are you doing some kind of needs analysis? Are you bringing them in at different stages of the project to chat with them to make sure that this is meeting the needs that you were hoping to meet? And always about sharing your achievements. You know, we love hearing from people. We love when it's, whether it's a tag on social media or it's a blog or it's just an email, just to let us know what's going on, what you've been achieving, and we're always happy to share that with others as well. So I'm kind of getting into the next bit here now, in that we're looking at the impact and follow-up. But I think you've been listening to us for far too long, so we're going to give you something to do now. I would also encourage you all to stand up and have a little move around a bit if you've been sitting here for the last hour while Carmel is putting up our next Menti. So this Mentimeter it's back to the same link that we had before. And we want to know, what are the impacts that you're hoping to achieve by implementing your project? So if you've got a project idea in mind here, if there's something that you're already thinking about, what impact do you hope it could achieve? And let's have a look at these together. And this might be a nice way of just teasing this out. So it's menti.com and the code is at the top. And if I can find the link that I sent earlier, that link should work again. I think, is it the same Menti, Carmel? Yeah. Yeah, she's nodding. And there's that link again. So you can just click that directly. Somebody is asking about the field specific priorities. We had a video about that in the email that you got before the event. And they're also in the program guide that we'll send you the link to later on. So do we have anybody online here on our Mentimeter yet? See if you're all still awake. And we'd love to get a few examples. This might take us a bit longer than just clicking where they are in the world, because they're trying to write a sentence now. Okay, so somebody is hoping to modernize the learning systems in their school. That's really interesting. I like it. Don't see anybody else online on it yet. If people are struggling with using the Menti, you can also just jump in the chat here, or even on the microphone. There's another one. Okay, so using training in natural building techniques to drive sustainable rural development. Okay, I would look at that one again. I would wonder, is that an impact or is that a way of working? So look at what would be the actual outcome of that. What would, what would happen? So it's just about flipping that language a little bit. Maybe your impact there is that there is now a wider pool of people who have the experience and who know how to do that. And this is where we always get a little bit caught up in this impact piece. So the impact is At the end of your project, what will have changed? What will be different because your project happened and took place? Supporting young people in rural areas to stay in school and look at training programs and apprenticeships. So again, that's kind of one of, the impact of that maybe is that more young people have stayed in school or more young people have engaged with these programs. Improving opportunities of those who have more difficulties. I would say that needs to be a lot more specific. It's a great plan, but I don't know exactly who are those people, what are the opportunities they're looking for. So I would make that a lot clearer and a lot more specific to exactly the target group that you're working with. What kind of opportunities do you want to give them? Tie it down to the field that you're applying under, whether these are young people, are school students, are adults, all of that kind of thing. Increased readiness of youth groups and youths to engage with and organise community art projects and local performance. So if we look at the difference between that one and the one we just had, that's way more specific. We can see exactly the target group. We can see exactly the type of work they're hoping to do. So I think that's what you need to look at to try and make sure that it's quite clear what it is that you're trying to do. And like that, they've worded it in such a way that it is that readiness. So it's already looking at what is the impact, what is the longer piece. More young people addressing mental health challenges in rural areas. Excellent. I can see how there might be quite a need for that. And again, that is kind of an impact that they're, we're looking at that sort of change that has happened. Oh, now they are flying in. Can you scroll down, Carmel? Or do I need to go to the other? I can open it.
I'm trying to scroll down here, but it's doesn't seem what it's. Okay, it should be scrolling down in a minute. I think it takes some time. There you go.
Okay, so I see one there about improving the social inclusion of people with disabilities through social farming. So again, that's probably more about the sort of aims and objectives of your project. So let's look at the impact. What will have changed after the project and that you can look back at. So hopefully it will be that there will be more people with disabilities who are feeling more included and have new skills and new experiences and whatever. Oh, now it's flying around. So now I can't keep up at all. So I hope this is just kind of useful. And I think it's really interesting for others to see what kind of things people are working on. I wonder, Carmel, once that scrolls down a bit, can you pause it again? Just like now. There we go. Okay. Excellent. So there's one about e-tools. A variety of e-tools is used by teachers in school for reaching different needs of students. Okay, so that's a nice, clear kind of an impact. So we see that this has, whatever you've done throughout the project means that there's now a greater variety of tools in use. A shift towards more consumption of plant-based foods with a reduction of consumption of animal-based products. That is one where I would wonder, is that too big? You're probably not going to change the whole world in a small scale partnership. So maybe you need to make that more specific. Maybe that's within a particular area, particular community. So just tighten that up a little bit, because while we hope these projects will be super impactful, I don't know that they're necessarily going to manage to change a whole societal perspective on things. So, tie it down to what it is that you're working on. Is that useful for people just to have a look at that and what other people are thinking you're working on? Already I can see so many amazing projects that are potentially there and such a wide variety of all different topics and themes. That's for later. Okay, well, let me jump back into our presentation then. So I hope that was just kind of useful for people to have a quick look at. And we do purposefully get you to do that exercise before we give you this presentation on impact, because I think this is something that does catch people out. So I think it's good just to tease it out a little bit more. So yeah, your impact is what has changed as a result of your project. What would never have happened if your project didn't take place? What has that changed? That's something that has occurred. Another important thing to think about there is, how can you measure that impact? Some impacts are very challenging to measure. They might take years to actually notice the long-term effect of something, but in a shorter term, what can you measure now? What can you see? And then also think about who you can share the results with, who you can share what you've learned with to maximize that impact. So if you're working in one small community and you've done an amazing project and it's had a huge impact on that one community, maybe it's useful to link with some other communities, some other organizations that are doing similar work to you, that they could also use what you've learned, use any toolkits you've developed or experiences that you've had. They could replicate that, or they could adapt it to their own scenario. And suddenly your impact starts to multiply across different communities, across different schools or different organizations. So we're back to this kind of graph again, that there's impact at all kinds of levels. So at the most basic level, your own team are going to develop new knowledge, new skills. They might question or change their own values, their own perceptions and perspectives on life. Within the organizations that are taking part, they maybe might decide to adapt some of their policies, procedures, or practices. They might have gained new resources, and hopefully some of what they've learned will get embedded into the daily work of those organizations. And it won't just be, and I think we mentioned this earlier, that the project has started and finished and that's it, but that this will actually be part of a much longer change that could happen. But then there also will hopefully be an impact outside of those 3 or 4 partners that you might have, on the wider, the target groups that you work with, and on the wider society and wider communities. And absolutely, we're always about sharing resources and encouraging new partnerships to take place and new projects to spark from one idea from another. So that impact could, in theory, be as broad as you can imagine. So start small, start with what can we change here, and then start to think about how can we spread that word to grow that impact. On our next slide here, we have a really nice new handbook that has come out about communication. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in this, because I think this handbook itself is actually fabulous and it will give you all the stuff that you need. So this is really about how to talk about your project, how to spread the word about what you're doing and what you've achieved. It goes through everything from the planning at the very, very beginning. So we always say, if you get the plan right at the beginning, it makes it all easier as you go along. How to maybe put a branding or a logo or a name on your project, how to write about it and talk about it, how to share those results, and also how to evaluate that communications piece to make sure that you are reaching the people you're hoping to reach. We sometimes get people telling us, oh yeah, we've posted every single thing on Twitter. Well, that's fantastic, but if you've only got 50 Twitter followers, you're only reaching 50 people. Whereas maybe if you posted it in a more public forum where you got the other people who are more involved to share it, or you sent it to us in Lergus and we share it for you, all of these things can possibly be more impactful. So it's always just about looking at who's the right target audience to communicate these things to, and evaluating that as you go along to make sure that you're reaching the people that you're hoping to reach. So I think that we are now at the point of, that is all the kind of facts and figures and bits of information we wanted to give you. We are now moving into the actual application form itself and giving you a talk about that. After that, we have a few little bits about the budget, just to give you some examples of how it looks. And then our final thing is just to give you some kind of common mistakes and pitfalls that people do, and a few last minute tips and recommendations. So I hope that you're all still with us. I know this is a lot of information, and I hope that your brains aren't ready to explode at this point. Does anybody have any questions at this point before we move on to the application form? Any thoughts or ideas?
Perfect. So I'll move on to the application form. So we haven't gone into the kind of the step-by-step questions of the application form, more on how the technical aspect of the application form and how to kind of submit. So this is actually a pre-recording of me a few hours ago. So hopefully it's not too long, and hopefully you can endure it. For me, this is going to be tedious to watch myself back. Here we go. From 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago, I am going to go quickly through the application form with you and to show you the process of how to apply. We won't be going into the project questions in much detail, but we will go through kind of the application form and how do you ensure you are submitting correctly. So if you bear with me for a second, you should see this page here. So first thing you should know, and you probably know this already, I presume majority of you have started your application form. If you haven't, I advise you to do it sooner than later because there's only 20 days left to apply, and it takes a lot of cooperation and discussion with your partners to ensure that you submit a good project as well, quality project. So if you go to the Lurkers website like we are here, you shall see a number list down of areas that you can link into. What we're going into today is the application forms here. So here's the application form. If you scroll down, you see the number of the 4th of October deadlines. What we're looking to go into here is the Corporation Partnership deadline for autumn 2022. As you can see, it's for school, vet, and youth. Also, this is for adult education as well for the small scale partnerships. So please apply here. This then will move you onto the web page for Erasmus+. As you know, Lurkers supports or coordinates 2 different programs, so the Erasmus+ and the European Solidarity Corps. What we'll be going into today is the Erasmus+ one here. So here's all the fields. As I'm working in the field of youth, I'm going to go into the open call for youth. So there's a number of other deadlines happening in the 4th of October and other October. So there's the Key Action 1 activities, which are the mobilities of young people and youth workers. But you're not applying for any of those today. You're looking at the small scale partnerships here. So you can see here that it says remaining days 20 and the deadline is 12 o'clock Brussels time. So if we click apply here, no, it's not letting me. Here we go. Clicking here, you should have your kind of EU login information already. If you don't know how to do that, we can send you information. That's quite easy. Obviously, hold on a second and I'll add in my password. Okay, so I submitted my password and it brought me into my application form here. So I'm just going to go quickly through the information. I have some of this filled out already, but I just want to go through the application form and show you what you need to do. So these are your list of kind of information that is required before you can submit your project. Some people are very different in terms of how they want to submit it or work on it. For me, I'm quite linear, so I would do step by step. Some other people would start with the project summary, or they might start with the project description. I'm just going to start from the first thing. So the area of context then is asking you what kind of field you're applying under. Obviously, once I went into the web page, I had selected youth already, so that's automatically generated. But then it asks you your project title, which I have put in KA210 Application Clinic September. Then you can have a project acronym as well. So I said Application Clinic, so APC. Here it discussed your project start date. Initially, it will always generate the first date of it. So you can start your project from the 1st of January 2023. So that's the first date they'll generate. You might decide, actually, we're not going to start our project off until, say, the 22nd of January, because we're all coming back from Christmas and it's a good time to start. You're looking at 12 months projects. Also, your project can go from 6 months to 24 months. It's important for you to consider when you're looking at the project duration, the length you want to do your project for. Like, I think depending on your work packages and the capacity of it, your project, you need to be realistic in terms of what you want to do. Sometimes we see that projects or applicants don't consider the kind of the preparation phase or the follow-up phase in their implementation of activities. And these are really important elements to your project design. So it's important to consider that in your application form. I'm going to put in 12 months here because I'm saying if I'm considering doing 3 different kind of activities or work packages are for, this might be an ample enough time. So this will then also generate your end date, so 12 months, so it's going to say 2020 of January 2024. Who are you applying for? It's important that you highlight that it's Lurgis exchange for euro, so it's IE01. For the higher education, it's IE02, but it's really important that you have the right first place there. And then the project lump sum, it's going to be between 30 and 60,000. So for today's example, I'm just going to say 30,000. In terms of priorities, as you've been sent out by the email Ursula sent out to you earlier, there was a link to the priorities for KA2 that Siobhan presented. These priorities can be horizontal or kind of reflective to your field specific as well. So your horizontal project priorities look at address areas of digitalization, environment, inclusion and diversity, and kind of the active citizenship and engagement. So these can be horizontal priorities, which mean they can connect to all fields. So they're similar ones, they're the same for vet, schools, adult education and youth. In terms of your specific priorities then, these are different and specific to your relevant fields. So for example, in youth, these are increasing quality, innovation and recognition of youth work. There's promoting active citizenship and reinforcing links between policy, research and practice, and then strengthening employability of young people. For today, I'm saying, okay, my priority is going to be on civic engagement and participation. So you selected that as your priority. However, then you can also select your different priorities as well you want to work on. These will also give you the drop down of the kind of vet and schools. If you're just working in, say, a field specific like youth, you wouldn't connect to a vet priority, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to say, actually, I'm looking at areas of civic engagement already, so that might connect to actually the area of like increasing youth innovation, youth work, so I'll click there. So these are my kind of priorities. In terms of topics addressed, you can have up to 3 topics you want to address your project to address. Be considerate about what these are, and you don't need to have 3, you can have up to 2, but I might say something like digital youth work is my priority, and that's it. Click it in there. As you see then, when I move through my application form, on the left, things are taking green, which means they're completed, which is great. In terms of project description, this is where you're going to really go into the nuts and bolts of your project. With this, I do consider that you look at the award criteria and look at what questions or award criteria reflects to your application form. So like this could go into your project detail and design, where you're looking at the project description. So it's really important that you consider, okay, in the application form, but how does it connect to the award criteria? And it's kind of like matching up the different criteria with your questions in your application form. So the first thing they go into is kind of your objectives, what outcomes you want from your project, and how does they link to the priorities that you selected. With your kind of project description, it's important that it's clear and concise. Have clear objectives and what you want to get, an overall aim, what you want to achieve. And remember when you're writing this application form that the external evaluators or assessors who are going to be assessing your project might not know the Irish context that well, or might not know what your organisation do. So don't presume that if you've worked with us before, that Lurgis knows what we do, so we don't have to add that in. Your assessors could be internal or external, and they won't know your context as well. So please provide all that information detail in your project as well. Outline your target group of your project, so who you're working with, who's the project for, what's the overall impact going to be, why you want to do this project, and why should it be funded. So what's the motivation, where is the needs coming from, how do you think it's going to be linking into your application form. Then it goes into the kind of benefits of working transnationally on this rather than at a national level. And this is an area where you can connect to your kind of European policies a little bit more in terms of your European youth strategy. You might look at the European Green Deal, linking with kind of your overall, give it a European dimension. After you fill all that.
You're still muted, Carol.
All the buttons, sorry, apologies. So it's quite long, it's another like 5 minutes, that video, which goes into the different activities and how to work on that. So I might send a link on afterwards for people to look at, because it is quite long and I have enough here in my own voice as well. So we might send that on afterwards as a follow-up as well there. So let me just get out of this and go into the next steps if I can. So hold on one second.
Just a few questions in the chat there. There was one, Dean, you might answer this better than me. A PIC has changed into an OID, hasn't it? Are they the same thing?
Correct. And if you have a PIC from the old program, it automatically goes into an OID. So you automatically still have it. Yes, correct.
Yeah. And then there's ones about changing partners. So ideally, you would not be changing partner during a project. I mean, it does happen, and we know that does happen, but ideally, this is a partnership project. So the whole idea is that you're working together with a few organizations on the same goals. And that's the whole point of it. Now, there are processes in place for the odd time if something goes wrong and the partnership is not working. But yeah, it wouldn't be the ideal. So you'd be aiming to have this all figured out with the partners from the very beginning. And I think that was all the questions, other than I think the rest we've answered. So here's just a few examples of how this can look, because I know it is a little bit of an abstract type thing, this whole concept of partnership and projects and what is it that we're actually doing. So here are a few examples just so that we can have a look. So this is a lovely small, which one have you up? Yeah, okay, 30,000 project. So this is two organizations that are both working on a similar type of work, but with a slightly different approach. So they've decided that they're going to partner to share best practice with each other. They're each developing a training course that they're going to deliver to the other's staff and the other's learners. And at the end of that, then they're going to hold a public event in each country to encourage even more learners to participate in the programs. So nice and straightforward, two organizations just coming together to learn and share together. So they've put in some budget for their project management costs. They've put in some budget for the development of those training courses and then the implementation of them in the two different countries. They're going to have their awareness campaign. And then they had 5,000 at the end for dissemination and documentation. And that was all of their different ways of printing and publishing and sharing what they're doing. And that totted up to a 30,000 project. So a really nice, small, simple, straightforward project. This does not have to be super complicated. Now, within the application form, they would be giving us a little bit more information on what those headings are and what is involved in each of those sections. But as you can see, it doesn't have to be something huge and complex. It can be something quite straightforward. So that's just kind of one nice example that's there. Here is a youth work example. So in this case, we have 3 organizations. They're working together for 13 months. Again, it's a 30,000 euro budget. And they're coming together to build the capacities of youth workers and people working with young people. You can see they've put in for their partner meetings. So they're going to have a few different partner meetings in the different countries. They're going to have a study visit in Ireland and a study visit in Spain. They're going to run this LTTA. So this is kind of an acronym that used to be in the old program, but some people are still using it. So it's a learning, teaching, training activity. So they're going to have a training event. That seems to be the bulk of their budget. So they're obviously having a big event with a lot of people and maybe a lot of people traveling from one country to the other for that. So that's a big chunk of their budget. And then again, they have a small budget there for the project management. They're just a general cost to keep the project running. So again, it's really clear what they're doing, how they've broken it down, nice and straightforward, a 30,000 euro project. This is a slightly bigger one then. So this is 3 organizations that are coming together to share best practice. So they're going to deliver training events in 2 of the different countries, and then they're going to pull a lot of work together to develop a good practice guide that they can all add to and they can all use and learn from. They're also going to have a big conference at the end of the project. What I thought was interesting with this one is that they're doing a lot of quite clever multitasking. So at one point, everyone's going to Cyprus. They're going to run a learning activity there for the Irish and the Greek organizations in Cyprus. They're also going to have the project management meeting for the key staff that are involved. And they're going to run a focus group with local people in Cyprus on the topic. So they're kind of maximizing the opportunity to be in Cyprus together. There's also an environmental piece there, that they're not buzzing over and back and taking a whole lot of flights. They're all doing it in one activity. Similarly, then they're doing that kind of thing again in Ireland, and you'll see the cost is slightly higher, and that might just be due to the cost of living in Ireland versus in Cyprus. And like that, they're multitasking again. And then in Greece, they're running a conference, so a much more straightforward thing than the complex ones they were doing in some of the other places. The bulk of their budget in this one is this development of a good practice guide. So there was a lot of staff time put down to the research and collecting all of the different data, as well as actually publishing that. And I think they even had an event where they were going to launch it in each country. So that's why that budget is that little bit higher, once they have this good practice guide to share it with others. So that's just a few examples of how this might look. I hope that kind of helps. And then we had Liz's example earlier of her project as well, because I know, yeah, we can talk all about partnership and project, but what exactly does it look like? So there's a few kind of practical examples. We want to kind of wrap up then with some of this bit about the common pitfalls. I think at this point, between me and Carmel and Liz, we probably touched on all of these already, but it's handy to have them all in one place. So the most common one is a project just doesn't make sense in terms of the sector. It's just not clear why they've decided to do it under that sector. That bit about the needs analysis, so it's not clear why this is required, what this project is really going to achieve. Or like that, it talks all about the needs in Ireland and doesn't actually mention what's happening in the other countries that the partners are based in. There is also some marks there for innovation. So if you're doing something that's been done before, or if you're doing something and it's not really clear how this is new, that's important. In terms of the project design piece, it's all about clarity here. So there needs to be a really, really clear and obvious link between here are the needs, here are the challenges or the issues we're trying to address. That needs to link to your outcome or your objectives and sort of what it is you're going to do. And that needs to link to the activity. So there needs to be a logical step as to why you're doing this project in the format that you're doing it, in order for us to be able to see, oh yeah, okay, well, this is the issues, this is what they're going to do, this is what the outcomes are going to be, and this is how it all ties together. I would often say actually get someone who's not even working in your organization or somebody who's on a different team to read over it, because sometimes we get so caught up in these things and they make perfect sense in our heads, but maybe get somebody with a slightly different perspective to read it and to go, what are you talking about there? This doesn't make any sense, because you don't want that person to be us when we're trying to assess your application. You want to catch that earlier. Also just bits about lack of detail. So just saying, oh yeah, we're running an amazing event and we need 13,000 euro for that, as opposed to that little bit of detail as to what it's going to be and where and how many people are involved and that kind of bit. That ties back into the value for money then as well. So we need to be able to stand over this and go, yeah, that does make sense. That does seem like good value for money. In terms of the partnership, so making sure that the partners are relevant, that between all of the partners, you have all the expertise that you need and that you're connected to the sector and to the target groups that you're hoping to work with. There's also the kind of cooperation side of it, so that the tasks and the budget are shared. They don't have to be exactly equally, you know, one partner can be taking a lead on different areas, but that there's a fairness and that it's clear why different things are assigned to different partners. And the impact and dissemination, so that piece of sort of what happens after the project is really important as well. So this needs to not just be a standalone project, it needs to be part of your organization, how it's all going to fit in, how it's all going to be continued after the project itself ends, where's that learning going to go? So give us a good gist of how you're planning to do that, both within your own organization and within that kind of wider community and your wider networks. Just in terms of some really general ones, people will sometimes say, oh yes, see the annex for this, and then they forget to attach the annex. We're not really supposed to go off Googling and looking something up. So it's not attached to your application. It's not part of your application. So do make sure it's there. Also just, you know, make sure all the partners are properly listed on that section that Carmel has in her video about the application form, that all their OIDs are listed, because if you start talking about some other partner further down the application, that can be really confusing if they're not on the official list. any other changes and inconsistency that happens halfway through the application. You know, we know that sometimes you work on this, and as you're working on it, you might kind of change your ideas a little bit or tweak a little bit, or you might take some little section from an old application that you've made better. You know, we know that that's fine, but just make sure that you have read over it and that it is really clear and really consistent all the way through. And then the final one there, spell it out. Don't leave out the obvious information. Don't forget to tell me that you're working with the DESH school when you actually, you know, one of our priorities is inclusion and diversity. Tell us that, and tell us what that kind of DESH school means to you in your local context. Presume, you know, we have a wide variety of evaluators, both Irish and international. Presume that your evaluator is going to be an international person who knows nothing about the work that you do. It's unlikely, they're all subject experts, but that's a good way to have it in your mind, is that these are people who know nothing about the sector. So really, really spell it out for them. And then the very last few bits then. So these are just our final tips. We've said this 100 times already. Do not leave it to the last minute. Make sure that you've actually worked on the application. They do sometimes crash on the last morning coming up to the deadline. So we always suggest you submit it a day or two before. Don't feel that you need to write this in some very complicated technical language. Use plain English, be straightforward, put bullet points in if that makes sense. Make it nice and easy for us to read and us to understand. And then I think Carmel said this earlier as well, give attention to all the bits. So don't spend absolutely ages writing about the project design and then forget to write anything about the impact, or scribble in a few sentences at the end. Spend a bit of time on each section because they're all going to be marked, and they're all going to be marked separately. And then that last piece about showing added value. So show that this is something that, you know, is going to have an impact, that if this product didn't exist, there would be a gap here that wouldn't be met. And then these are all resources. So when you get the slides, you can click on all of these. These are some extra bits and pieces to help you out. The project results platform on the bottom left there is basically a summary of every project that has taken place over the last few years. It's absolutely amazing. You can filter it and search through it. So you can say, I specifically want to see adult education projects about working with migrants, or I want to see youth projects about environment, or all of that kind of stuff. And it can just inspire you in terms of what people are working on so far. You can also see the organizations that are working on. So if you're kind of trying to find partners and things, you might be able to go, oh, hang on, I have an interest in this, and send someone a message. The black one there is a book all about project management. So it just gives you lots of hints and tips about how to actually run your project once you've got started. And even at application stage, it might give you some hints there as to what you could say in your application about how you're going to manage your project. The blue and green one at the back is the least prettiest of them all, but it's also important. So this is the lump sum handbook. This just talks about how to manage those lump sums and how to do your budgets and things like that. I will say that book is for both the cooperation partnerships, which are much bigger funding, and the small scale. So make sure you're reading the right chapter or you give yourself a fright. Because for the bigger partnership projects, you know, there has to be a whole thing about work packages, and it's all a bit more complicated because they're up to 400,000 euros. So read the index and just skip ahead to the small scale partnership section. And then the last one in front there is the communication one that I mentioned earlier. That's all about how to communicate your project. So that will absolutely help you with the last section of the application form, the bit all about follow up. This is just a snapshot of our website. So if you're trying to figure out where all these things are that we've mentioned, we've put some of these links in the chat already in terms of getting your OID, checking your eligibility, finding the application forms. They're all on the website. This is where you find them. Click on create a project and then go over to the right-hand side, and they're all there. I know our website is a bit fiddly on a phone, but it works perfectly on a laptop. And then this is your next steps. So we're there finally, lads. And 4:20. We said we'd be done by 4:30, so we did all right. So this is the program guide, is the big book that we mentioned that has all of the information that you need about Erasmus Plus. You do not need to read the entire thing because it's 400 pages, but we've given you here the key pages. There's kind of 7 pages there that are specific to the small scale partnerships. There's also other sections that are useful in terms of aims and objectives and things, but that's the main bit. We've also talked a little bit about getting your OID, and make sure that your partner organizations also have their OID sorted. They will all have to do that in their own countries. So there might be slightly different processes involved around that. and then get that application form finished. Your deadline, your absolute deadline is the 4th of October at 11 a.m. But as we've said a few times already, do your very, very best to get it in before that, because I think it's just easier. Last thing that we just wanted to mention here, if you're sitting here and this all seems a bit much and you're not sure, there is a fantastic seminar coming up in Copenhagen in November, and the application deadline for it is very, very soon. It's the end of the week. So this is an opportunity to go over to Copenhagen with a bunch of other people who are also brand new to small scale partnerships and learn all about them over the space of a few days. It's also a great chance to meet other people that maybe could be potential partners with you when you go on to plan your project, as well as loads and loads of learning. We are co-hosting this with Denmark, so there'll be, you know, a good few Irish people as well as a good few Danish and lots of others from all over the Europe. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting opportunity for any of you to sign up for as well. And especially anyone who's sitting there thinking, oh gosh, this all sounds a bit much. I think after 4 days of that, you would be absolute experts, and I would be expecting spectacular applications in from you on the March deadline after going to that event. Unfortunately, it is after this current upcoming deadline, but I think it's going to be great. So this was a whirlwind. I hope your brains are not all fried after all of that. Please do come in with any more questions again into the chat, and I think Carmel has a quick evaluation to do with us. Last one back onto Menti.
Yeah. So final time, guys. The evaluation is good for us. Oh, great, so people have already filled it in. It's great for us, so we know where we need to develop or what areas we need to focus on again, and also gives us a sense of, okay, people are on the right track. So if people could fill this in, that'd be great. I mean, I think if this is your first time applying for Erasmus Plus project or as a newcomer, especially when you're looking at the key action 2s, I think it's always going to be daunting. I don't think anyone ever feels 100% confident applying, and that's okay too. As long as you have the right partners, the right idea, and you know what you want to do with your project, then hopefully the confidence will be seen through your project then as well. Great to see that people find the workshop today useful and is happy with the structure. It is a difficult thing for us. I think we can see that I had to cut the video short there. There's so much stuff that we can go and talk to you about and go into much more detail, but today was to give you kind of a clear overview of kind of the work criteria, what's involved, and what kind of areas you should consider when applying. Obviously there's some piece of research you need to do yourself. And that's unfortunately we can't help there. I forgot to note that when I was doing the welcomes this morning that we didn't highlight who's in the room as well. So Gemma is responsible for adult education. Dee O'Brien, who is responding to the chat, she's responsible for the school sector. I'm responsible for youth, and then Siobhan, who's not here at the moment, is responsible for the vet. So we'll give you all our links and information afterwards through the email, so you can contact us directly if you have any other questions or need additional support. Okay, perfect. I might move on if people are not. Next one. Okay, so what's your big takeaway from today? So what is the main thing you're going to be like, okay, I didn't think about this before and I definitely need to look into it more, or what do you think you need to, biggest learning part for you today? Sometimes that's a waiting game here. If you don't feel comfortable maybe putting in the chat, we can in Menti just put in the chat. I know people are a bit tired now to stage, so it might be a little bit difficult to write, but we'd really appreciate it if you could just do the last few minutes of this and then we will let you go.
Well, we'll give them a few minutes. They're probably trying to write a sentence here. Also to introduce our newest colleague is Ursula, and Ursula is here. She's going to be helping all of us across all the sectors for these KA2 projects. So you'll probably get an email from her later on with all the follow-up information and things like that. We won't be asking her any very hard questions just yet because she's only just joined us, but she can absolutely direct you to the right person to answer your questions if you have anything after the event today.
Yeah, I think you've all got an email from Ursula earlier on yesterday in a few days as well. So she's a great one as well to ask questions for her as well. When she can direct them on to us. Okay, so we have more confidence in applying, getting on second. Yeah, like so. I mean, there are 20 days left. It seems like a load of time, but it's not when you do have to think of, okay, your partnerships and, you know, your needs analysis and all this areas. It's important to link of it. Small is okay. Yeah, this is a small scale partnership. It's the hint is in the name. We don't expect to have like, it's like a 30 or 60,000. It's like principal to the grant. Even a 30,000 project is going to be less big than a 60,000, and it's I mean, so just consider the grant you're looking at and what is realistic to achieve within that grant. So that'll be important. So greater understanding, small scale, be clear and concise. Yeah, be clear. Sections are equal. So yeah, that's all great, lads, and that is what we would be thinking as well when we're saying this as well. And yeah, just be more confident in applying. If you have a strong partnership and you know their need there, that's the big chunk of work done there as well. It's just then fine-tuning what you want to get out of and achieve. We're getting more in there. So first, yeah, so perfect. I'm conscious not to leave anyone's spice out of this as well. So I might give it another second. Spend more on time and prep. Yeah, the prep is so important. And by spending time in the prep, it makes for such a more smoother project as well. So if you're meeting your partners and actually seeing, oh, actually we don't agree in this element, or this is time to flesh out your project, rather than when you're in partnership and then realizing, oh God, we can't work together. So the prep is so important in terms of establishing that foundation on how you're going to work, how you're going to look at responsibilities, what's your priorities, and what's your kind of ethos as well, or like, can you work together? Are you compatible? Next slide then. Oh no, that's it. That's the end of it. So I hope that is great for everyone, and like you will be sent all our emails as well. So do touch base if you need to, and best of luck for the 4th deadline application.